everybody. We're so glad that you're here and really appreciate that you have taken time out of, I'm sure, very busy personal schedules to come and spend an evening here at Shoreline City Hall. I'm Debbie Terry and I'm the city manager for the city of Shoreline. And so I just wanted to kick off this evening's event. As you are aware, I'm hoping anyway that you are aware, light rail's coming to Shoreline in 2024. We can now say it's about 5.5 short years from now. And I think if you think back on, what maybe has happened in your life in the last 5.5 years, it's hard to believe how fast that time has gone by. And that's why we think it's really important that we start planning now, because it will be here before we know it. And we want to make sure that we have good infrastructure, roads that support both the needs of pedestrians and those traveling in cars and trucks and other vehicles, that it works for transit, because that's the point, is making sure that buses can get to the light rail stations along with people so that they can use that transportation system. And we want to make sure that the traffic flows. We also want to make sure that there's great things for the public, that there are gathering spaces, that it is comfortable, it encourages neighborhood businesses. So that's really the reason why we're starting the 185th corridor study. And I think that it's really important that we're starting now and we're getting input as early as possible on that process. We've got a lot of opportunities to get public input. We actually started last Saturday. Here's some pictures. Some very adventurous people that were willing to do bike and walking tours. I think Miranda told me we probably had about 40 people there. We also had a session this last Tuesday that was a drop-in session and a session with stakeholders. And there's information on the board of some activities that they did. You guys will get to participate in some activities tonight to make it more interesting, so we're just not talking at you. So we look forward to hearing what you have to say, and I think it'll be really important that we be able to take all this information as we formulate recommendations on down the line for this important corridor. So I think I covered all the main points I was supposed to cover, and I'm going to turn it over to Nora Daly-Payne, who is our project manager on this project, and she will introduce her team and talk a little bit more about what the project will entail.
There you go. Thanks, Debbie. I am Nora Daly-Payne, project manager for the corridor study, and I'm so pleased that you're here tonight spending time with us in the beginning of the process to make the corridor as best as it can be. And to set the table for our conversation tonight, we're going to give a brief presentation, and starting with an overview of what this project's all about, and then what we really need to do is step back and say, where have we been, and then where we're going, and then how we're going to get there together over the next year. And so I like to start off with the name. Names are really important, and we have a long one. It's a mouthful, the 185th Multimodal Corridor Strategy. And the best way to do this is really to break down those words and share what we mean by that. So let's start with multimodal. Multimodal is a very important priority for the city. 2 years ago, we created a complete streets ordinance. And what that means is that for all of our road projects, we are going to look at how can we accommodate safe walking, biking, driving, transit trips for every road. And we'll do that for this study as well. And then corridor, when I think of a corridor, I think of a straight line, usually from A to B, but our corridor is a Z configuration, and it's for a really good reason. This project has long arms, and it's about connecting neighborhoods and connecting neighborhoods to and from the future light rail station. So that Z configuration is, let's see if I can get the highlighter to us. Yes, 185th from Fremont all the way through Aurora, all the way over I-5, and then heading south on 10th, and then uphill on 180th to North City. And we just want to let you know that we always want to design our corridors in context with the surrounding streets and open spaces, and look for those opportunities to make better multimodal corridor connections, and also open spaces. How can we provide those spaces that Debbie was saying for community gatherings? And so with that, I just wanted to highlight, you know, we know there's many streets, a lot of them are north-south, that intersect with 185th. And we're going to be listening for your input on those, and we're going to be taking that input forward as fodder for a couple of different efforts. One is, it's called our Master Street Plan Update, which is, it basically communicates to developers how we would like them to put together their frontage improvements, and together that creates a cohesive street. And another way, it will provide fodder for future capital improvement projects. And so the last word in our title, strategy, what we mean by that is strategic planning. So this corridor is a very long corridor. All the funding we have for it right now is to do this study together. So strategically, what are we going to have as a lever to actually get this implemented? When we get more and more gelled on what makes a cohesive multimodal corridor, we're going to look at it in terms of how can we break it into phasing? What are the smart decisions so that we can leverage other capital improvements that we know are happening, like the light rail station, to get more bang for our buck. And then also, I just mentioned, but I'll mention again, it's really important that we have a cohesive corridor vision so we can fold that back into the Master Street Plan Update. And as the corridor is developing, we can have each one of those new developments contribute frontage that fits together. I kind of think of it as pieces of a puzzle all coming together to create a full picture. And then lastly, we're really going to be looking and listening to you for ideas of small, quick win projects or pilot projects where we can claim the space, make those improvements, and communicate to the public changes happening, and this is something that you can use and occupy right now. So we'll be looking at that together. And then I just wanted to give kind of a high-level overview of our one-year process. So we're just beginning, as Debbie said, and we're providing multiple opportunities for input along the way. We'll be taking your input, and we have a lot of fun activities, ways to get your input tonight and even beyond tonight. We're going to have online surveys. This winter, we're going to be aggregating all of that input, and we're also going to be looking at the future needs, demands on this corridor, and starting to develop some design options. By spring, we'll be having another series of outreach events to get your feedback on the options that we put forward. And from there, we're going to be moving towards an optimal design or hybrid design for that corridor vision. And we expect by this time next year, we'll be coming back to the community with a corridor strategy for your review and for acceptance. And so with that, getting back to where we've been, I'd like to ask Miranda Redinger, my co-lead, to talk about the history.
Absolutely. Thank you. So a lot of you in the room are probably aware that I led a process for 4 years from 2013 to 2016 for sub-area planning for both the 185th station and the 145th station. Now, the good news is this process involves no change to land use. So we're just looking at the road, we're looking at roadway design, we're looking at fun design features, but in addition to the background of this project being the sub-area planning and a lot of the information, including technical analysis as well as community input that is carrying over from sub-area planning, this is also an opportunity to implement policies and goals that the city has all the way back from Vision 2029, which was a community engagement activity from 2009, to our comprehensive plan in 2012, to all of our master plans, transportation, stormwater, parks, to our climate action and sustainability planning. This is kind of where all of that stuff comes together and really can become real. Some of you are familiar with this imagery. We used it a lot in the 185th sub-area plan document. The intent of creating this design concept was to be able to do traffic modeling and show one concept for how the roadway could change. Nora mentioned the corridor. That corridor, the connecting corridor from Aurora down 10th up 180th to North City also came from the design workshops for sub-area planning with the intent to connect those areas. And this was one concept for how that could be done. Some of the primary drivers behind this particular design were that, you know, we're going to have two bus systems from two different counties. We're going to have Snohomish County Swift, King County Metro, both terminating at the station at 185th. So we're going to have significant increase in transit service. Right now, 185th has a striped sharrow for bikes. Well, once we get that increased transit service, that might not work out so well for the bikes unless we find a safer way for them to also use the road. So the concept here was to pull the bikes out of the roadway, put them near the sidewalk. Now, the point of this process is to come up with two additional design concepts that we will work on and we will bring back to you in the spring, and we will let you compare and contrast. We're going to talk about pros and cons and how these impact, you know, bikes, pedestrians, traffic, trees, all of the things. We're going to talk about, you know, street treatments and other stuff in the spring, but for right now, we're here to remind you what has happened in the past, what we plan to do through this process, and let you know what to expect. One of the concepts we'll come up with probably will have the bikes inside of the curb lines. One of the principles here was to not move the curb lines. Total, we have about 60 feet of right-of-way here. The concept that you can see outlined in the cross-section on the right was about an 80-foot right-of-way width. So that would have imagined expanding the total right-of-way by about 10 feet. It's not a foregone conclusion that the roadway will need to be widened. We will look at some options that do widen it. We will look at options that don't widen it so that we can compare benefits and costs and impacts to neighbors. So just be aware that just because you've seen these pictures in the past, that doesn't mean that that was the final design. That was a starting place, and we're going to develop a couple others, and then we'll have fun comparing them. This was also one of the illustrations that we created through the 185th plan. This one looks specifically at the hill climb on 180th Street. And, you know, as Nora mentioned, there are different characteristics for different segments of this corridor that may lead to different design options. For instance, with this corridor, bikes tend to travel a lot more slowly uphill than downhill. So this may have a different arrangement than, say, an area on 10th or an area on 185th. So that's one of the things we're going to explore in the exercises tonight. And Brianna, our consultant, is going to explain kind of how we divided up the corridor and see what you think of those different characteristics for those sections. Also, we'll note lastly that one of the little interesting pieces we gained from sub-area planning and looking at the history of the neighborhood was that apparently, I don't know, in the 50s or so, folks used to ride motorcycles up 185th and in the woods in that area, and so it was called Motorcycle Hill. And so this art here is an homage to the history of the neighborhood, and I think that's a really exciting thing when we get more into design details about how you can use art to create place, to be able to tell where you're going, to guide people, and also to pay homage to the history of the neighborhood. So with that, I will turn it over to Brianna Holen with Element Architecture. She is our project lead for the consultant team. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Miranda. So I am an urban designer. So I come at this with a couple things that we hope to achieve in working on this project. And really thank you for allowing us to do this work. It's really great. I've worked in this community before, and I'm happy to continue on talking about the 185th corridor. So primarily, we start out with really wanting this corridor to be aspirational, that it's part of our collective vision of all the collected wisdom in the room, and for all the people we've been hearing from for the past couple of days as we've been researching or having these series of events. But not only that, but the conversations that have brought us here to the state that Miranda was talking about, of all the planning and conversations that the community has had, that all those things are influencing what we design. Secondly, Nora talked about this being a multimodal corridor, but beyond that, we want to think of it as multifunctional. It is about the modes that travel down the corridor, but really our streets do even more for us. Underground, there are all the utilities that are bringing services to our homes. There's opportunities to think about this in terms of habitat corridors, of how species can travel. And also, as Miranda was talking about, of gathering, it's a social place as well, and we want to look for those types of opportunities. And then finally, but probably most importantly, that we do have an eye for the future, that anything that we recommend is going to be rooted in the triple bottom line of sustainability, that it has an eye for economic, social, and environmental goals for the long term, that it's a resilient plan. So anytime we start a project like this, it's really fun for us to both take a bigger step back and also get into the fine granular details. So we took a trip to the Historic Society in the corridor and came across this really lovely painting that summarized some of the character that was originally Shoreline, with the indigenous populations here, the Salish tribes, the different pathways and settlements, and also it talks a little bit about the significant landscape that really is serving to frame what Shoreline is today. And it was interesting to overlay this with an aerial, and those pathways are still, that were established then, are still relevant today, of traveling east-west to the different water bodies. So as Shoreline is developed into the turn of the century, it became a new era that was maybe a little more rural or agricultural. But what was interesting to note is even back in the turn of the century, our corridor was here, and those connections were established. Also, that there was the early highway, the first highway that took people up of Highway 99 was prevalent back then. As we moved into the 50s, a little bit more of that suburban growth pattern is starting to develop, and we see a lot more urbanization happening to the community, and full build out as the highway, the I-5 came through in the late 1960s, really served to really bifurcate the community, but also brought a lot of what the urban growth pattern is today. And I think from the 70s to what we see on the ground now, this is really the era that we've been in, being a more suburban bedroom community, but flanking by two commercial corridors of North City and Aurora, and then institutional uses of the Spartan Rec Center, surrounded by mostly single-family residential. So I like to think that we're actually on a precipice of a new era with this regional transportation system that's coming in, that's going to connect us, and also with the zoning changes and things that are going to happen. You're already starting to see a lot of development on the ground changing. So this is a great time to think about how we want to grow and what we want our community to look like, and what we want our streets to do for us. So outside we have a bunch of different boards that start to think about the corridor. We've broken it down into these what we're calling different components, because we think there's a little bit of different character that's happening along the corridor, and we want to hear from you if these are the right pieces. But I was going to go through and kind of talk about these and some general observations that we have, or opportunities that we want to get your feedback about. So the first being the Aurora Crossing. I'm going to go actually through each one of these and what we see as opportunities. So just to first start of what are the types of things that we're eventually going to be looking at. There's a lot of different components that are happening in a streetscape, and these are all the parts and pieces that we are gonna wanna get our arms around and understand and create some vision for. So there's bike lanes, and there's sidewalks, and there's wayfinding, and there's how the intersection is treated, and how we're connecting to our different transit users, how the utilities look. Obviously, the street trees are very key and important to us. So I'll start with the Aurora intersection. I don't know if you guys have had a chance to watch the video that's been on loop of this aerial footage, but we had an opportunity about a month ago to fly a drone over a lot of the corridors. We have these very interesting perspectives of how the corridor is really being used, and it's been very educational for us. So we see Aurora as, it's really a gateway. It's really a way that a lot of people arrive into the city, and there's perhaps an opportunity to think about that it's the highest traffic volume, and there's different modes that are traveling down it. And so what are those opportunities for art and placemaking and making that message of welcome to Shoreline, welcome to this corridor, welcome to this neighborhood really work in that area. Also that it's a very high volume intersection. There's a lot of activity on it. How do we think about it in terms of being more comfortable as a bike or pedestrian on it? And are there different ways and treatments that we can apply to it that make it feel a little safer? Also, there's a very significant regional interurban trail that comes into that intersection, and how we think about that as a meeting place, and how do we integrate that with the overall system so that connection is clear and established. And as one of our big commercial corridors, how does that commercial activity interface with the street? How do we think about how the building fronts it and interacts? And also there's a significant amount of parking in that area as well, and how that integrates and how we can travel through it. So the next is kind of the main, what we're calling the central spine, the main leg of 185th itself. So these are more the traditional streetscape elements. We know that trees are very valuable, highly valued in this community, and that's true to us as well. So we want to hear from you of what are those key places and moments and places that we want to celebrate, and are there ways that we can work to preserve those trees, and how we might think about that. Also that the street itself can serve as a civic identity, that there's things that we can do with paving or with markers and things that really celebrate the community. And in vein of the multimodality is that there's a clarity of that system, that when you're on a bike, you know how to get to point A, from point A to point B, and it's a clear path. And when you're a pedestrian, you know when and how to cross the street safely, and if you're a car, how to not interrupt with those patterns, or how to behave in this network. Stormwater is another key piece. There's opportunities for our streetscapes to do a little bit more for us, and our utilities to do a little bit more for us in terms of providing amenity and planting and treating stormwater. So those are things that we want to investigate, and whatever ideas that you have about opportunities that we want to surface. And this is turning into a mixed-use corridor by and large with a lot of the zoning changes. And so as we're thinking about neighborhood serving retail and what that ground level really looks like and how it interacts with this street, there are absolutely opportunities to think about activation and how that frontage might work with the street, because it's an important component of it. And then of course these other features of placemaking and lighting that really serve to make a place feel special, of how you think about seating, how you think about unique opportunities and paving, and all those sorts of patternings. This third is our station access. So this is a design that is in 90% development, and so we're very much responding to the improvements that are already on the table, and so we want to know how we can interact with those and integrate with them. So this is a rendering perspective of the current design and the bus circulation on top of the station. And Juniper is also here from the city that can answer questions about the station as well. But there's opportunities of to this destination and how we are comfortable making sure that we can all get to the station and it's a clear path. And what is that experience? That wayfinding, it's going to be a behavioral change of this is a new thing adding to the city, and there's going to be a lot more people coming to this one point that we're going to need to consider. So there's regional systems of wayfinding, and there's local connections that we want to make sure that people are aware of. Also, that this is a regional destination, so we want to make sure that we're embracing that identity and taking advantage of that. So we want to tell the story of this place and what are those opportunities in the streets and even potentially in the crosswalks. And then our fourth piece is what we're calling the neighborhood connectors, and that's that last leg of the 185th and 10th and 180th as it connects to North City. So understanding that the neighborhood connection, this is a lower grade of traffic. This might have a slightly different approach to how we think about the cross-section and the design, and there's potentially new opportunities that we want to think about of that it's a place for all these modes, but maybe at a smaller scale, and maybe there's an opportunity for very localized interventions of whimsy. Thinking about the edges and traffic calming, and that it might be a little softer of a focus and touch. And then that there's a little bit more parking to think about how that might interface with the different modalities, and there's some different solutions that we can think of how we treat that, and it feels like it's integrated into the streetscape, and the different modes have places to be. And then finally, the sidewalks. There are currently not sidewalks on this piece of the corridor, so to make sure that we feel connected and that it's a walkable connection, and that it's safe and we're comfortable in this environment. So all these images, I should have said this at the beginning, but I didn't. All these images are really not design ideas. These are just to evoke conversation and inspiration, and we want to hear, if there's things in here that you absolutely hate, then please tell us. If there's things here that you love, then please tell us as well. Nora's going to kind of talk through the different activities that we have out there. There's a few more minutes. If you have any specific questions that we can answer before we go out there, please get them in, and we'll do that. So I'm going to turn it over to Nora.
Thank you. Okay. So thanks for sitting through the presentation. I just want to take a few more minutes to give you the lay of the land out in the lobby before we do a Q&A. So I hope that all of you have signed in tonight. If you haven't, there's still time to do that. At our sign-in, we like just to know how many people are in the room and what neighborhoods you come from. We have a really cool neighborhood map that you can put a dot on to show that. And we have a general a general comment form. And we also have, it's been circulating, just please write down your questions. We're going to have somebody come around and collect them and deem them. There's a lot of people here tonight, and we're thrilled about that. And we want to be able to address, you might have a similar question of 5 other people in the room. So that's how we can manage our time together. But I also wanted to point out, we have a lot of staff here tonight that are going to stay here and be in the lobby. And we are here to have those conversations with you. So team, if you can just put your hand up just so that everyone knows. If you see somebody with a tag like this, they're on the team. Come talk to us. Okay, so a little bit more of our activities, which we started last Saturday. You'll find those, there's blue balloons out there, and it's called the Rate the Quarter Spider Graph, Halloween-themed activity. And it really comes right back to that multimodal term that I defined earlier. We have samples that folks did on Saturday if you want to take a look at those. But it's basically breaking down the corridor, your evaluation of the corridor, from 4 different modes. So as a pedestrian, as a cyclist, as a driver, as a transit rider, how do you feel the corridor is delivering today. You'll complete, the left-hand side first, and with the scores that you give, you mark them on the spider web and you take a marker and you connect all the dots. And that's the visual of how the corridor functions in your perspective. Next one is really just piggybacking on all of those great visuals that Brianna just shared with you. It's our corridor, look at that, character? Components. Has so much character, so I was thinking. This one just steps through really one of the big questions is, do you like how we broke out the corridor character? You're the experts, you're the locals, you get to actually draw on this and make new components and tell us why. Use words and something fun, not just for kids, but for kids at heart. In the back of the room where the red balloons are, there's a Design Your Street. You can use these little sketches in color to put together a streetscape. And here's a map of those stations. That's our lobby. So 4 different color balloons. If you get lost, our staff are here too to help you navigate all of this. I should also add, we have a really straightforward and fun activity. You probably saw the big roll map, aerial map, right in the middle of the lobby. That's just our invitation for you to write some things in Post-its and put them down, anything. Collectively, all the knowledge you share is going to help inform our process. And so with that, this is my last slide, and then we're going to do Q&A, is how would you like to stay engaged with the process? There's many ways. So thank you again for being here tonight. We have a website built that we're going to be updating regularly. If you would like to sign up for alerts, there is a place for that on the website so that any status updates or meetings will be pushed to your email box. The activities that I just went through, those balloons, we've created similar activities via an online survey that is going to launch this Monday. It'll stay open until November 25th, so just after Thanksgiving long weekend. And if you know family, friends, neighbors that wanted to be here but couldn't, they can do the online survey. I'm also being filmed right now, so the presentation tonight and the Q&A is going to be posted to our website so we can share this evening's event with more people. And then lastly, we're trying to get up to speed with modern times and do a hashtag. So I mean, this is new for me, but we have a hashtag, and people have been taking photos and posting their ideas, and it's just another tool for us all to stay together and inform the process. Okay, so with that, I am ready for the Q&A part.
Yeah, looks like we've got about 6 comments cards, and if you come up with others, feel free to flag down Christine or Brett. Or also, again, we've got a number of staff here, but since we just have a small number of group questions, I think we can get through all of them. We'll try to go quickly. So this is not a very detailed answer, but we'll try to hit some highlights. So first, will there be a light put in at 185th for the light rail station parking? And again, we have a resident expert here. There will be a light, a signal at where 5th, coming from the south up to 185th, is across from where the station is, and that's marked on the aerial map out there. If you want to look at some improvements that Sound Transit is proposing to make. How are side streets going to get onto 185th? Right turn, left turn, and again, I will give it a crack, and then anybody else in the room, we've got traffic engineers and transportation planners and all manner of subject matter experts. But we haven't decided yet. We, haven't decided about turning restrictions or any of that kind of stuff. These we'll look more closely at traffic modeling, and we'll come up with alternatives that could create a very functional roadway. Anybody want to add anything?
I think I'll just add that that's kind of the feedback we want to gather from you tonight is what are your thoughts on how that works, how access to and from driveways or side streets works?
Okay.
How about to turn on the one, excuse me, how about the turn on the 185th going south on 5th? Going south on 5th Avenue, turn left on 185th has gotten very difficult. And I know that is an arterial, but it's not safe anymore.
Kendra? Okay.
So, not build grand plans for that. Oh, I'm sorry. So the question I believe was southbound on 5th, kind of coming from north of 185th, the left turn to 185th is difficult now. What is the plan to address that? I think this corridor study is another opportunity to look at that issue. In addition, the Sound Transit light rail station area construction and improvements are going to make some minor modifications, and that they'll add a two-way left turn lane that will allow for left turns from 5th to enter into a refuge space, if you will, before then joining the main line. So it'll function similarly to how you see 155th, for example, or west of where that location is along the corridor on 185th. So that does help. We understand that that's not, forward into, 2040, 2050. That's probably not sustainable, but it does address the immediate impacts of the Sound Transit light rail station opening. So we do want to hear more about that kind of issue tonight.
Next question is about bikes. Have you guys considered having bikes routed on parallel roadways and not packing them onto 185th right of way? Like have a nearby designed parallel bike route, if that makes sense, so they aren't next to speeding cars, sort of like 58th and Ballard. An east-west bike route. Is this cost prohibitive, not effective, non-existent? I think the main challenge with the road network for 185th is that most of the side streets don't punch through. There's a lot of cul-de-sacs. There's not a lot of parallel roadways. So, I think that's something we can look at. Again, it's not a primary directive of this, is to look into the land use in the side streets. There are other processes that we will look at those, but it's certainly something we'd like feedback on.
Can I piggyback on that? So one thing that I mentioned earlier was we have a complete streets ordinance in place. So for every roadway project, we always start from a position of how can we accommodate all modes, and that includes cyclists. But also in terms of just a system, I like your idea about, are you being mindful about parallel routes? Because we want to create a network, and we do have our bike system plan board out in the lobby, and there will be a staff person to talk about that some more. I also want to just communicate really quickly, not get into it deep, but we are taking an opportunity with light rail construction to look at an idea of a trail on the rail, which would be basically parallel to the light rail, adding another 2.5 miles ultimately of shared use path. So that is another way for a big contributor to our bike network. As we fill it out, we want to provide options for all types of users. Some people are cautious cyclists, and others are what we call strong and fearless.
And the next question is also multimodal in nature, so don't go too far. Is the priorities for the new sidewalks more consent rated in the areas leading to the 2 link light rail stations, or are they according to areas with the heaviest foot traffic?
Can you repeat the beginning of that question?
Sure, it's about prioritization for the sidewalks. Are they sort of public opinion or heaviest foot traffic?
Okay, so I was the project manager for the sidewalk prioritization plan last year, and we actually have the board out in the lobby tonight. In order to come up with those priorities, we really looked at it from multiple criteria. So safety, proximity, connectivity, and, sorry, I'm just missing out. Sorry. Trying to remember what my fourth criteria. Equity, thank you. And so I think that's a good start. I'm not going to go into the details, but please come see me and I will walk you through the prioritization process. Thank you.
Okay, we want to keep it moving since there was a flood of questions after we thought we could answer all of them. So, you know, these are great questions, and I'm sure that there are a lot of people have similar questions. So one of the questions is, can the power lines be buried, telephone, other utilities, and also when is there an RFP for public art? Power lines are definitely a huge question. As I mentioned, some of the design concepts will have alternatives, and one of the alternatives will show them buried. At least one will have them above ground, so we can look at cost implications, design implications. We had, as they mentioned, a series of stakeholder groups on Tuesday, in addition to the drop-in studio, and we had the utilities there. And so we've got, you know, PSE and North City Water and Comcast, and you know, there's all manner of different things going on under those streets and sidewalks. And they didn't express a very clear opinion. They just said they need to know so that they can figure out how to design around that. So that's one of the things. We'll come back. We don't have an answer yet. We want to hear your opinion. And then we want to look at how that impacts cost and design. And RFQ for public art, we're definitely not ready for that yet. We are certainly interested in, again, part of the characteristics and defining that, and will help us you know, understand what pieces are important. Where opportunities are, that's part of the pilot projects, and where do we have opportunities. What standards, if any, are in place for building aesthetics, because that affects property value, and if there are no standards or guidelines, why not? There are standards. We do have design standards for our buildings. One thing that we will be working on in 2019 is standards specifically geared toward townhouse design, because as you are aware, that is what the market currently wants to build in the lead up to the opening of light rail. Previously, we did not have zoning that allowed for townhomes, and so most of our design standards are geared more toward apartments. So we're going to take a very specific look at townhome design standards, but we do have existing standards. We will continue to develop those and dial those in. Will any of the affected streets be cut off to cars, 185th, 10th, 180th, or any other streets within a 2-mile radius? And then will my property values go up or down? We did put together a whole property tax values. It was a huge component of sub-area planning. We have handouts on the sub-area planning website, which is shorelinewa.gov/lightrail. Generally speaking, property values tend to go up in proximity to light rail. They also tend to go up with increased development capacity through zoning. And then Nora, you want to talk about whether any streets have been considered to be carless?
So again, we're just beginning. So if that is an idea that you like to suggest, we want to hear it. We really need to create these distinct options so that next spring we really can compare and contrast them. So I welcome any creative thinking.
Okay, so there's really only 2 more questions left. So I think we can probably just power through and still have plenty of time to do the exercises. So how do you design plazas, green areas, and transit centers to not become a magnet for homeless hangouts? That's obviously a big concern. There's a lot of design, and a passage to Nora. Brianna might want to weigh in as well. You're probably familiar with most of the time benches are segmented. Most of things tend to become fragmented, harder, spikier to be less inviting.
Yes, so the physical design is a key piece to it, right? We can have police surveillance, but as Jane Jacobs, probably 50 years ago, talked about citizen surveillance, so creating really active spaces is one of the best ways to prevent crime. And if you heighten legitimate use of a space, if there is somebody there that wants to stay on a bench for for 4 hours or 8 hours and there's lots of people in that space, it really works out just fine. It's when we have neglected spaces, dark spaces, hidden places, that's where it starts to become either perceived as dangerous or a magnet for crime, or as the question asked, if homeless people would camp there. But I think we all need to think about elevating those spaces and claiming them as community spaces with pride. Was that the last question?
No, Juniper just wanted to weigh in.
I just also wanted to mention that the design of the 185th Light Rail Station has turned out such that most likely current design includes 24-hour security on site. So there will actually be a presence of sound transit security at the light rail station itself.
And then lastly, as an equitable community, council starting to develop more goals around, how to prevent people from slipping into homelessness. It's one of the reasons that the mixed-use residential zoning requires some level of affordable housing. So, over time, we do not have a lot of places for homeless people to receive services in the city, and part of it is creating places for them to go to do laundry and other functions. So now they keep rolling in. I will not go more than 4 minutes with Q&A, so because we do want you guys to have time to do that. In similar projects, how has the city worked with landowners where the road right-of-way extends onto the developed property, e.g. the right-of-way is part of their yard? I assume that the landowner isn't eligible for compensation. Will the city construct any mitigation measures, fence or shrubbery? So as we mentioned, in the concept that was developed for the Sudbury plan, the right-of-way was about 20 feet more than currently exists, so 10 feet on each side. Again, that's not a final design, but if, let's say, for a minute, that was the final design and we needed 10 more feet. So potentially the city would work with property owners to acquire that land, pay for it, definitely compensation would definitely be required. I think can be discussions about other mitigation measures like fences or shrubbery. But I think, not to get too into the weeds about this, but currently when it was single family zoning, there's a 20-foot front setback. So there was already a space of 20 feet that no buildings, well, technically one building on the entire corridor is constructed into. So when we changed the zoning, which decreased the setbacks, we also said along the entire length of the corridor, there is an interim setback of 20 feet so that we wouldn't have any buildings building into that space, so that it is all still yard at the moment until we figure out the design, and then we'll figure out the sidewalk improvements, and then we'll figure out what developers will build with their projects, and the buildings will eventually get closer to the street, but what we're trying to do is prevent anyone from building into that space until we know what the final design is. And then what about a light at 8th and 185th, where drivers will turn to enter the station parking garage and drop-off area, versus a roundabout shown in the sound transit rendering? And how do we keep bike lanes safe, smooth, as projects are done one project at a time? Example, current townhouse project on 185th. And I'll touch the second one real quick and hand it to you. So that is something that we definitely need to consider. As Nora mentioned, we do not have funding to do this entire project as a capital improvement, so it will happen incrementally. It will happen as Sound Transit makes improvements in front of the new station. It will happen as development makes improvements in front of there. So we need to think really clearly as we develop this plan, how we create a smooth transition over time. So that's definitely one of the things we'll be focusing on.
Okay, and I'll address the other question about 8th Avenue Northeast and 185th, where the vehicle traffic will enter the light rail station parking garage. So for those who don't know, the vehicle access point will be on 8th Avenue Northeast and north of 185th Street. And so I think the question is around how they get there safely and efficiently. So again, for those who don't know, Sound Transit's currently proposing a roundabout to address some of the traffic level service and efficiency issues at that intersection with the forecasted volumes. I think the question was, why not a light over a roundabout? We are really in line with Sound Transit in evaluating roundabouts as a first approach rather than lights or traffic signals as a first approach. This is for many reasons. For one, they move traffic really well. They are proven to be much safer for all users. They slow down traffic, which means that the risk to all folks is much lower. And one of the real great benefits too is the overarching maintenance cost as you look at the lifespan of that facility. So lights, traffic signals take a lot of money to maintain, to operate, to check signal timing, to replace light bulbs. With roundabouts, you eliminate most of those costs. Of course, there are still costs associated with maintenance of the streets that circulate, but the ongoing cost to the city is much lower, but it accomplishes the same goals of moving traffic safely and efficiently.
Great, and last question. For the group, are there standards for the type of materials allowed so that we don't end up with a ballardization or perestroika-like similarity of buildings made of two similar building materials and design? So that is currently part of our design standards. We require articulated facades, a variety of materials. Those are the kind of things that we currently have in our design standards. One of the things about the corridor is that there's a lot of flexibility in what's allowed in terms of zoning. It can be mixed use, it can be commercial, you can convert a single family house into a restaurant or a yoga studio or an accountant's office, and that the council decided to create that flexibility. Now, then it's up to market forces and, to determine the use as well as the pace and the intensity of redevelopment. One of the things that we're going to do, for those of you that are aware that the zoning was phased into 3 phases along 185th, or in the whole sub-area plan, with phase 1 becoming activated when the sub-area plan was adopted in 2015, phase 2 kicking in 2021, which was originally 2 years before the station was set to open, and then the final phase kicking in 2033, which again was originally 10 years after the station was open, and that's when Sound Transit's predicting mature ridership and that kind of stuff. But before the next phase of zoning kicks in, we're going to do a report about what level of development, what percentage of parcels that were rezoned have developed, and what is developing. If it's predominantly townhomes, then we probably want to take some steps to say from an urban design perspective, that's not what we want. We don't want a whole corridor full of townhomes, even though that's what the market wants to build right now. So I think there are some other interventions that we may take. We're going to keep letting it play out for a bit longer and see what's happening, and then see what we need to dial in from there. So I'll let Nora say thank you. First, I will say thank you for joining us, for giving us your input, for coming to the meeting. There will be ways to keep in touch. I think most excitingly are the workshops in the spring where you actually have design alternatives to look at. But please stick around, give us your feedback through the various venues, and thank you again.
I think Miranda said it all. Thank you very much, and I'll see you out in the lobby with the team.